Well, hello, everybody. Looks like we've got good audio.
Yeah, let me do a quick introduction.
Okay.
Sylvia, because that's what we normally do.
Sure.
But, this is our new colleague in Cincinnati, Sylvia Reeves. She is currently in a retired state, but not for long. She's a meteorologist by training at Cornell University as undergraduate, and has a lot of years of experience in different domains. And with her master's degree, then was in science policy with North Carolina. She worked in Colorado and Northeast the United States, and she worked with NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration.
Yes.
NOAA. She has expertise in a domain that our center really lacks, which is in meteorology, and specifically around drought and an interactive tool that she's going to be able to tell us about, which is very exciting. And we hope that she will become much more engaged with us. She found us, which is even better. I mean, like, how did that happen? That's awesome. And so this is just the beginning of what I think will be a very fine relationship. Did you want to tell us more about your background? You said, okay.
Thank you, Ardith. I am so glad to be here and have an opportunity to chat with you all. And I'll just get started with regard to my background. Born and raised in the Midwest, so I'm back, definitely. Joined when I went away to Cornell University for my degree. I went because I was a Carl Sagan fangirl and decided I wanted to be an astrophysicist, and got there, and I absolutely hated physics and theoretical physics, and decided to look around for a while, found my original passion when I came back home and saw a tornado. And I said, that's the science that I really want to be in. So that started my career. And luckily I had an Air Force ROTC scholarship. So I went into the Air Force as a meteorologist. So aviation meteorology background. Air Force throws a lot at you. So I did a whole lot with, believe it or not, dismantling weapon systems that had chemicals. So a little bit of atmospheric dispersion while I was in the Air Force. Decided to get into the private sector with private meteorological firms, and then also took a little time to go back and get that master's degree right about the time of Katrina. When that happened, it was very clear that an embedded meteorological expertise was needed within the emergency response, emergency management community. That led me into emergency management in the state of Connecticut, and I was there 8, 9, 10 years doing that. At that point in time, we were facing threats from looking at smallpox, H1N1, anthrax dispersion. Again, my atmospheric dispersion expertise came in handy there. And that's where I started really plugging into the medical community, the public health systems, the hospitals, working with radiological emergency preparedness as well. So a little bit of background in the nuclear infrastructure that we have in our country. And then finally, I had an opportunity to work for NOAA. So just about my entire career was outside of NOAA, but there was an opportunity to actually drill down on something that I had not had experience with before in terms of natural hazards. That was drought. Spent the last 5 years coordinating drought in the Northeast, and you'll see a little bit more in the slide presentation about how that's all set up in the United States. And then we'll dive deep into some impacts, health impacts, and also take a look at the tools that are currently available, both from NOAA and some other universities in the area, and we'll go from there. So, ready, rock and roll? We'll go for it now. Okay. So we'll go with the overview, and Jessica, immediately the slides are not changing for me here. I think I'm sure. Okay. Is it share window? It might be. Thank you. There we go. All right. So let's just take a look at what we're going to try to get through in the next hour here. I'll give you a pretty quick background on what is the National Integrated Drought Information System. And you can tell right there from the name, integrated, multidisciplinary, that's the key thing to focus on. We have a lot of different partners that bring a lot of different expertise. Some of you guys are in this room talking about heavy metals, talking about environmental concerns. Can't do it with just meteorologists. It's really important to bring the whole party or open up the whole party to a lot of different disciplines. We'll drill down on some drought impacts. We're going to talk about how NOAA has been involved with engaging with the public health community and healthcare providers. We'll hit those drought and health impacts and try to key that portion of the interaction today to what your interests are. So then you can say, hey, Sylvia, let's take a look at Western Texas and drill down on what's going there, or let's look at the issue of what's going on with the Great Salt Lake and arsenic in the lake bed there when it's dry and when it's droughty and it's windy. We're going to take a look really closely at what we call compound and cascading impacts related to drought. And then we're going to spend a little time, which is where you'll need your computers. So you can do it you can actually access the NIDIS tool set on your phone, but I do recommend pulling up your computer, and we'll have a QR code for that. And you'll be able to see your screen and interact on that, and that'll help you both learn what the tool is about, but also, just be able to follow along a little bit better. So this next slide kind of gives you that overview. Drought has very, very strong regional characteristics to it. In the Northeast, where I was just working with all of the Northeastern 7 states there on drought that comes up, we deal with something called flash drought. Quite literally, you can end up with drought within a 3-week time period if you haven't had precipitation. And that comes on suddenly enough that most of the research in that is probably less than 10 years old. Okay, I'll stop talking. I guess it's a loud buzz that comes on. But out in the West, drought does take on different characteristics. It's those longer term, slow roll, it creeps up and you kind of drought. So is that it? Okay, we'll roll on through, and if I have to stop, I'll stop. And basically, about the early 2000s, the drought was so bad out west that the Western Governors Association approached NOAA and the Department of Commerce, which NOAA is a part of, and said, we need some help on this very specific topic of drought. And the NIDIS program literally was born. And it was basically set up to bring together a lot of different agencies who have expertise. So this is our slide letting you know all of the agencies, DODs, the EPA, FEMA, USGS is a huge partner for us. Of course, CDC has been involved, and just a pantheon of folks who have come together to share their expertise around drought. You'll actually see some of the NASA products that we use to monitor drought. But I think one of the key things has been universities working in particular fields that are doing very detailed and specific research, some of which I've seen on the other seminar, the YouTube webinars that you've had, looking at how is this really being reflected in healthcare issues. And then, again, working with some regional partners, regional climate centers, the National Science Foundation, a lot of research going on there as well. So that's the group. Let's take a look, drill down a little bit more on drought. Everybody knows drought affects our agriculture, what we grow, the animals we raise, the price of steak that you plan to eat for your Valentine's Day dinner or the chicken that you grow. There's that agricultural core to drought impacts that we typically see first. But in the last 15 years, we've also seen impacts, huge impacts to our infrastructure, our drinking water infrastructure, typical bathtub ring that we saw out west. Not all of those reservoirs have refilled just yet. So we're dealing with long-term drought. We're dealing with effects to transportation. I grew up in the St. Louis area, very familiar with the Mississippi River and what it should and should not look like. And as of late, when the Ohio River, which had typically provided 60% of the flow of the Mississippi south of Cairo, it hadn't been doing so. So we've had a couple of summers, a couple of falls where we've seen barge traffic come to a stop on the Mississippi River. The impacts there are huge for the cost of grain, huge in terms of just trying to get other large volume commodities moved around our country as they had been in previous years. And also, we have to look at the fact, and we'll spend a little bit more time on this, drought doesn't just show up by itself. It's typically compounded by high heat, which we're seeing extremes. So as we move into the future where we're seeing more impacts with higher heat, that's complicating and multiplying the effects of drought. And we'll have some time to throw in some questions here in a minute, but I did want to just bring up a couple of slides that are probably things that are fresh in everybody's memory. On the left of the screen there is Lahaina when it was on fire. And that implied a lot of things other than wildfire and fire hazards in an urban area. We're talking about air quality. We're talking about water quality. We're talking about economic impacts that have completely changed that side of the island with regard to the fact that when you wipe out everything that's there, it's Hawaii, folks. Real estate folks are going to come in and take a look at what's going on, but there's a huge caution there. Are they thinking about the future of drought in this area? How densely are you going to zone that rebuilding? What are you going to do for the water infrastructure there? And also, again, it had at one time been an agricultural area. They were used to the idea that occasionally that side of the island got a little crispy. But when you combine that with dense populations, you get a lot more problems in terms of wildfire. And poor Lahaina wasn't even in what you'll see here shortly is what we call one of the higher categories of drought. It was pretty low, like D1, D2. But again, a little bit of dryness goes a long way when you have an ignition. Same thing with the California, the LA wildfires. Again, they had gone through 10, 12, 15 years, depending on where you were in California, of drought. Then atmospheric rivers burst right into the scene, tamped down the drought. Everybody saw the aquifers refilling just a little bit, but then we saw an opportunity for our cascade effects of drought to start to show up. So again, this is an example actually from Montecito, California, and the Thomas Fire, which eventually evolved in there. So back in 2012, 2016, they had the drought. Then they had some atmospheric rivers come through, and you're looking winter, spring 2016, 2017, made the growth of that young vegetation come right back. Then drought cycle started again, and you went right back into having an opportunity for what those seasonal Diablo winds, those Santa Ana winds to combine with dry and now ignited vegetation to give that problem. So literally you can follow this path repeatedly until you get to even a post-drought environment. Maybe you're getting a little bit more precipitation. Then you're looking at the idea that you've got soils that now no longer have vegetation, holding those soils in places. That rain comes in with the next atmospheric river, and you start to get the landslides. So this focus more recently on the cascading effects and making sure that our health communities, our public health plans are very focused, not just on the event that's happening, but actually what's the downturn going to look between an area that sees drought in 2012, and then what could happen just a few years later in 2018. So let's just zone in right now. We'll probably focus on some of these elements of human health implications of drought. So we'll talk about drinking water issues, air quality issues, and that kind of directly relates to the wildfire occurrences that are really throwing PM 2.5s. And we are also seeing some PM 10, some larger particles from those fires. We need to talk about the difference in wildfires and the wildfire urban interface, which is getting more into urban areas. So instead of Lahaina and LA, and also the Marshall fires out in Colorado a couple years ago. So that Marshall fire ripped right through a suburban environment. And what they're finding now with air quality in those homes, that some of them are trying to be rebuilt, some of them are, down to the ground and they're rebuilding everything. Others are trying to clean it up, but they're going in and finding huge amounts of cancer-causing chemicals that have been residually placed on the drywall or carpet surfaces and things like that. So air quality is a big one right now. Infrastructure impacts, talked a little bit about drought and transportation, drought and energy. I believe it was, if I get this correctly, Kankakee, Illinois has a nuclear power plant. And during one of the 2017 droughts of the upper Midwest, there was an issue with the river that flowed through that area. I believe it's the Kankakee River, being so low from lack of precipitation that they were considering shutting down that nuclear power plant because the water intakes were insufficient. So now we're looking at, oh, okay, well, if we shut down and we have alternate power sources, but maybe we're not getting enough power, and we're thinking about our populations that have that need for CPAP machines, for oxygen compressors. The medical community, again, needs to be thinking about those cascade impacts related to energy and infrastructure issues. Not so much in our country, but when drought does impact, say, areas of India and areas of Africa, we're literally going into the food scarcity issues. One of the interesting food sovereignty issues that I encountered in the Northeast was with our indigenous tribes in the area. We had gotten a very bad drought in the state of Maine, and one of the traditional food sources for the tribes there is salmon. And when you have salmon, literally in a little puddle, people were going out and scooping them up and putting them in a bigger puddle, trying to get them into a flow or a slightly more survivable environment. So again, we're looking at some issues that could affect nutritional and traditional habits in the United States. And finally, there have been several research projects that have shown both anxiety, depression, and even suicide rates have increased when we see certain drought conditions that have persisted for quite a long time. And we'll look at our drought maps in a minute and kind of see how that plays into why we need to keep our mental health partners keyed into what's going on as well. About 2019, NIDIS just decided to pull a bunch of public health departments together and say, okay, we just had a bad drought in 2017 in these upper Central Plains area. What happened? What was the epidemiology telling you? What were you seeing? And there was in that entire list that we just went through, those were the items that came up. And then the next step with the research was, let's get details on exactly how that wildfire smoke impacts respiratory health in nursing mothers and babies and children. How does it impact the community that suffers from asthma, and what's going on with that? So that first report, which you can find online, and I have, I believe Jessica told me that the slide deck is available. So there's some links to these reports that I'll talk a little bit about, so you can get in there and see how this whole drought and health partnership has evolved and where it's going. So that report was done. And then we worked on that with the University of Nebraska's Medical Center, their public health department, Dr. Jesse Bell, if anybody knows Dr. Bell, very much a partner with NOAA and with NIDIS on looking at, again, the effects of drought on health. So here's your QR code. Time for you to dive into your computers there so you can follow along. You can also just Google through drought.gov and pop into the first page of our tool search work. Okay, has everybody got that? I'm going to move over so that you can follow along with me and take a look at drought.gov. I believe that's pretty clear on the screen there. So once you get to the page on drought.gov, you can always just click and pop to the entry page there. And we're going to just scroll right down. Don't want to make anybody seasick here going too fast. But I want to give you the basics on how we've been tracking drought since the year 2000. Again, a pretty recent invention in terms of looking at how do we characterize drought with indices that are calculated from precipitation amounts and evapotranspiration rates and heat, and looking back at the climate data. And then how do we also use the indicators, not indices calculated, but indicators that give us an idea of how severe a drought can be. And those categories were put in place by the University of Nebraska's National Drought Mitigation Center. So this is a map they produce every Thursday. So it's based on data that comes in over the time period of a week. The data cutoff is Tuesday. This map comes out every Thursday. So you can literally see here the different areas that are, even during winter, when drought is typically like a bear, it's hibernating a little bit. We can't always see through the snow. Sometimes the gauges on the rivers and streams are frozen. We're not getting all the data that we normally get. But still, there are many areas like Texas, and I'm just going to zoom in on Texas here, where we're watching about 16.1 million people under some form, one of those categories of drought. Go right ahead, Arden.
But they're used to.
Mhm.
So.
It generally starts with looking at the climate data and saying that typically at this point in time in Austin, Texas, we would have had so far for the calendar year 6.7 inches of rain. A drought would be based, some of those calculated indices would be figuring, looking back at, well, how much rain have we've had 2 inches, less than half. And again, those numbers aren't exactly for Austin, but to give you an idea of how drought would be defined. And again, if you're living in an area, let me pull out a little bit here. I'm going to go back. And you can start surfing around on your computers. Those calculations are going to look a little bit different for Florida. So if you actually dive in on some of the information that's in Texas versus in Florida, you can see those regional differences just based on precipitation averages and things like that. It doesn't take much to get you into a drought, but when you want to look at drought index information, you can definitely go to NIDIS has done a lot of work on this interactive website to make sure that you have the tools so you can dive deep on how those indices and indicators are calculated and determined. Many of the papers supporting that work are also available online. So I'm going to back up here just a little bit. Any more questions right now or anything anybody would like to target? I'm going to go back to that US map right quick so we can play around even with Ohio and any other locations. And just by the way, we do include the territories, Alaska and Hawaii. Your question, sir?
So based on your explanation, so there is no like permanent droughts, for example, like the Mojave Desert. So it's relative based on the precipitation for the year. It's not like
Right. You're looking at, there have been, in meteorology, when I started almost 45 years ago and 100 years before that, what we call climate classifications. So that's where you have a desert environment classified as a certain letter and a combination of numbers, certain level of aridity. Even the polar ice caps, there are almost classified as a desert because of the low precipitation that they've had, very little, but it never, with the snow, it just never goes away in most areas. That's changing, obviously, with heat in our environment now. But the idea that we're still dependent on taking a look at the last 30 years, which is a typical climate period that we look at historically to make those determinations about precipitation amounts that are normal, or we look at maybe the last 50 years. And we've even got some information you'll see a little bit later on in the presentation that goes back thousands of years, a calculated index that talks to us about the standardized precipitation index. That can even give us information based on what we have from tree rings and coral samples and ice cores to see what the level of precipitation, what the levels of drought or wetness looked like many years ago. I'm really interested in the local area since I'm new to Cincinnati, and I went up to Fort Ancient, and I started to try to see if there was a correlation between the rise and fall of certain Mississippian culture, civilizations, and drought and agriculture. It's usually not just drought alone, it's a cascade. There was drought and resource challenges and war and, a combination of things that typically I've heard people say, and I can't remember where the quote came from, drought can be the destroyer of civilizations because it's usually involved in, or when civilizations flourish, it's because they typically know how to control their infrastructure and water. Think of the Roman aqueducts. So that helped them expand that empire, keep it going, water. Water's just so key. So there is the climate designations that tell us arid or tropical or wet environments, but then we also do these calculations and look back. Let me just jump down there to, actually, I'm going to focus on Ohio. So the tool, you have lots of tools available through this particular website. Again, looking at some numbers and impacts. And this is the stuff that the media loves to grab. How many people are, and it's just really quick to go and get it, see some quick trends. Are we looking for the trend to go toward more normal conditions? We kind of keep an eye on things like the northwest portion of the state right now has been in drought a long time. I'm hoping they have great snowpack that melts very slowly and can help that. But we're still seeing some drought, which is not just defined on surface conditions or soil conditions, but also stream levels, underground reservoirs and aquifers. So many things that we have to take a look at. This area, I'm going to be watching very carefully as we go into the spring and to the summer. Again, there are those categories. Can tell you that about D3, we're seeing about 7.8% of the state involved with extreme drought, Northeast. We can actually get down to county levels, and somebody's got to help me. What's the Northwest county? Let me just try that one. Wood. I don't know my Ohio counties yet, just having moved here. A little bit more detailed information on the number of people impacted there, what that county looks like in terms of its coverage of the lesser drought down to the southeast. Then we can get into things like taking a look at the last 7 days of temperature. And again, in winter, temperature's not helping us out very much here in defining what's going on with that drought, but we're going to see more clarity as we come into spring. But we're looking to see how things change. And also with temperature, something like looking at the 30-day anomaly, this is blue, and we're running kind of on the cool side, which is very normal. But during the winter, or excuse me, during the summer, when we start to get into periods where high heat is a problem, it's going to be key to watch our temperature trends, because then we begin to look at evapotranspiration rates from the soil, from the plants. How fast are we losing our moisture for those growing activities that go on up there? Here's the obvious. I'm not sure, are they growing? So again, during the corn growing season, wheat growing season, you can kind of tune into what's going on locally here and figure out how that's starting to impact agriculture. Stream flow I talked about, so you can take a look at some of the areas up near Toledo, another county here. And again, when you're seeing red, we already know our water table's pretty low. It hasn't been recharged in quite a while. So that's what's, again, figuring into that drought calculation, that drought designation. Let's pop down into the public health sector here. Not so much in Ohio, but we do watch air quality. And we use the Air Now website to do that, but we'll try to pull data in, or NOAA and the NIDIS team will pull data in from Air Now to keep track of what that air quality is looking at. It's more important out west where fires are going in. Yes.
I got here late. I apologize. Are you an epidemiologist, a meteorologist, or something?
Meteorologist.
Meteorologist.
Yes,
Okay.
but I've worked extensively with the public health community.
Okay. All right. So that I understand now.
Oh, okay. Got it. All right. Well, just pop in with questions anytime. Some more of those tools that are out there. The drought outlook, persisting. So again, giving you a local public health department looking at this will say, yeah, maybe I need to stock up those N95 masks. A healthcare provider would then say, oh, yeah, my patients are still going to need to be prepared, the ones who are on asthma inhalers and things like that. So persisting drought up there is what the outlook is. You can begin to look, let's see, not much going on here with an outlook for the quantitative precipitation forecast. We're not forecasting a lot of rain, so that makes sense with the persisting drought. Of course, this would light up quite nicely along this scale if we were expecting some precipitation out there. And this was that historical tool that I was kind of referencing a little bit earlier. The National Drought Mitigation Center started producing the scale that we're working with in the year 2000. But we can use our climate data and go back 1895-ish. And now we can actually look at the scale where we're seeing both dry events and wet events, which is good in terms of even infrastructure planning over 100-year, 500-year time span for some infrastructure projects. You can also see when we had some areas of high precipitation. You can easily see the 1930s drought showing up in there. Let me see. This was Wood County. I'm going to go back to, let's go 1930 to, let's say 1940. Drill down a little bit deeper to see, again, just how those wet periods interacted with the more predominant dry periods during that time frame. Again, the information with our paleo data can take us pretty far back. Again, this is focused on Wood County. You should see the one for, again, I grew up in the St. Louis area where the Cahokia Mounds are nearby in Illinois. You can actually go back to the history of the rise and fall of the Cahokia Mounds people and see there was a drought period involved right about the time that they started having some impacts and that society itself started to collapse. So there's this data. Let me go back to the full US here.
How are you doing that? So I noticed when you show that climate data, that there's like a really hot period, and then during that same period, you don't see it being, the precipitation being high.
Mhm.
Like you have a drought period that predates mostly, I guess, wet period.
Yep.
Why is that? Because I was expecting where if you have a very hot season, you know what I'm saying, you have an extremely hot season, I thought it would tilt the other way and have an extremely cold season. You know, I know that,
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
but it obviously doesn't happen like that.
No, no. And that's where a lot of the research is occurring. What are those drought cycles like? Let me pop down. Here is, let's go back to Oklahoma.
And the reason why, because I'll be done with that, the reason why, because they say we're going into another ice age. So is that because we're going through such an extensive, I don't know, global drought, that the only way that the earth can recuperate is to go through this, or?
I'm not sure there's a connection there,
Oh, okay,
but we
great.
are looking at, most of the research is looking at everything from the Milankovitch cycles, which are the cycles literally of the planet and how its tilt affects our weather, how it affects climate. Looking at, there's even research on, solar sunspot activity, how that influences the weather patterns in general. But when you get down to drought, you're literally looking at what are the cycles. For instance, the cycle that gave us our cold spell, extreme cold for parts of the eastern half of the country. We're just looking at a dip or a change in that jet streams. Well, what's influencing that jet stream?
Okay.
El
Right.
Nino, in the ENSO cycle. So El Nino, La Nina, really strong in terms of influencing the frequency of atmospheric rivers. So California had a what, 12, 15-year drought? Switch got flipped, and now they were in a cycle of atmospheric rivers. Switch got flipped again. So again, it's a little bit less with temperature
Yes.
and that kind of a change. Although when you start to talk about those cascade impacts from drought, a local extreme heat event will worsen your drought very rapidly. In the Northeast, that was something we saw in fall of 2024. So we had a little bit of lack of precipitation there. Then we got some warm days, and then all of a sudden we went from like D0 to D2 in a week, a week's time. And then there are periods where in the Northeast, which is our climatic data indicates it's a wetting climate, but that does not exclude drought. You're still going to have periods where you don't get the rainfall that is historically going to give you those great crops.
Thank you so much.
Does that help?
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's drill down on some of your questions here. Somebody wanted to talk more about the paleoclimate stuff. Did I see a hand? Oh, Arden.
Oh, sorry. Intense, but not Oklahoma, but Ohio. Although you see it in Oklahoma too, that there are, for Ohio, it's not like we have much of the state really. Quarter of the state is not small. But that we have this very intense drought for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 5 Minnesota counties and then some. So what causes that specificity How can it be that
It's,
specific? You see, it seems to be very.
and I'm gonna pull out here so you can kind of look at that in context. So you literally see a little band here.
Yes.
Yeah. So quite literally, that is an area where the normal precipitation pattern has not been what we call normal over the last year.
It's the next year, for example, go back 2 years would be entirely different area. Or do you get
Mhm.
areas where, and then again,
Mhm.
it's always defined by themselves,
Mhm.
relative to themselves.
Local indices and indicators.
So
Yeah.
is it really defined by that county?
It's that county, what was that? Wood County probably has multiple weather observation sites. So those little weather stations you see with the anemometers and the solar, how much solar radiation they're getting. They typically have what we look at as soil monitoring, soil moisture monitoring. Let's look at that map, as a matter of fact. Ohio soil moisture conditions. NASA gives us these products, sport and crop chasma. And unfortunately, it looks really bad right now. We got all that red there. But again, that's 0 to 100 centimeters soil moisture percentiles. So things are looking pretty bad, and it's been that way for a little while. So again, there are lots of ways that we look at either stream flow conditions up in that area. We kind of looked at those earlier, looking at what the satellites are telling us about, even gravimetric calculations of soil moisture at very specific locations. So all of those things help us figure out what's normal and what's not normal and where we're seeing dryness occur, expand, contract. And again, the pattern is that good old jet stream that everybody talks about on the Weather Channel. Where is that jet stream right now? The jet stream was such that, and I don't have a picture of that, I should almost have that up. The jet stream was essentially dipping down through the Central Plains area and looping down almost to North Carolina, then coming up. And what that dip does is allow that cold air to come in. If you shift that jet stream pattern and the weather systems that flow along that pattern, you're going to shift your precipitation patterns. And that's why we see that strip of dryness there from, what was it, Toledo to St. Louis.
That's the following jet stream and perhaps some other influences. And it would shift from area to area over time. It
Over
wouldn't
time.
necessarily be typically, because it's always regarding
Mhm.
usual. If it was always usually dry, then it would no longer be considered drought.
Let's go back to 20, let's try 2012. So that different pattern all together. Intense drought around September 20th, 2011. Again, that was a pretty extensive time period. Let me just go 2011 to 2015. That was like almost nonstop drought in Texas. That was a time like this past year where they were selling off cattle because they had no feed, they had no grass. They could not sustain those herds. Our prices of beef went up and skyrocketed in that period because that's such a highly focused area on cattle and cattle production. Let's pick another time frame. Let's go even further back to see some of those wet and dry patterns. 1930s Dust Bowl, that's usually pretty interesting. So let's, 1930, I'm gonna pop there. So that's where we were. Look at that same area in Ohio, was doing pretty good at the time. So the weather patterns were such that it was a wet period there for August of 1929. And let's just type in and go to say 1922. Oops, did I just lose my update? Okay, so we're just looking at the timeline here. Finally broke out of that awful, and this is aggregated for the entire United States again, awful time period with a pretty decent event for precipitation to be flopping in the other direction. And it's fairly characteristic of, we call it weather whiplash. Okay, well, we're having that today. Welcome to weather whiplash. What the temperature is now 53 degrees. What was it this time last week? So the same thing can happen with our precipitation patterns as well, depending on the jet stream, on whether we have a strong El Nino or a weak La Nina, or we're in the neutral phase. Out in the east, let me pop back to reset that graph. Most people thought the Northeast would never experience drought. And I wrote an entire report on the drought that impacted Ohio and the Mid-Atlantic from 2024 to 2025, which included wildfires, which included infrastructure impacts. So you can't really say any area is immune to drought, maybe a slightly different type of drought, not a slow, steady 10-year decadal drought, but flash drought. Eventually the pattern breaks and we're into a better condition. Jessica, do we have any online questions? I wanted to make sure that we caught anything from that side. Okay, got it. So anybody out there in the ether, let us know if you have questions about, let's do some more surfing of our major information categories. And I'm going to go by sector first, because Ardith and I talked a little bit about agriculture, manufacturing, water utilities. Water utilities, huge. Because what was your water bill? How was, I live in the Milford area. And when I moved here this summer, I noticed a lot of working on water mains. How old is the Milford area? Hundreds, some of that infrastructure is really old. And all you have to do is get a little bit of drought and those pipes start to snap, because that soil around it is drying out and shifting and things are changing. So I was going, okay. And sure enough, when I moved here in the summertime, we were experiencing a little bit of D1, D2 drought right in this area. So water utilities, we'll have a page on that. Let's look at, you were in the environmental interest side. So we're watching impacts to prairies, deserts, Mediterranean type forested environments. Drought has an interesting impact on forested areas and trees, in that most well-established trees can handle a couple years of drought. We see it in the tree rings. That's how we get some of our paleo data. But what we're noticing now, when you combine drought with heat over a longer period of time, you're going to get impacts to that tree that allow infestations on occasion to come in and disrupt the forested ecosystem. What was it in the California Southwest saguaro cactus? Heat tolerant, drought tolerant plant, and they were dying just because it was such an extreme long period drought and extreme heat, even more so than those plants were used to take. So we try to track things by sector. And this is a good area on the website to pop in and see what's going on with public health. And again, we're not seeing too much right now, but we will monitor heat information, but that doesn't happen in winter. But we can still keep an eye on, let's zoom in here and take a look at I don't see a lot of air quality issues. We're hard to do this drought thing in the winter because it's just a little. So we're getting some yellow, some moderate air quality issues in this high drought area in Texas. But we'll be watching for wildfires. And again, that's where we go to our partners, USGS, Bureau of Land Management, the folks who track regional agencies that track wildfire frequencies and fire incidences. And when those fires start cropping up, I think it was Louisiana a couple years ago, very unusual to get a drought right in here, but they started having, just wildfires cropping up everywhere. And that air quality tanked. And folks were going to the doctor for respiratory and cardiovascular illnesses showing up a whole lot more. One of the more interesting ones that happened, go back, pop West Virginia in here. West Virginia's drought started June of 2024, kind of got a break by December 24. During the fall, local health departments were noticing an increase in folks using EpiPens, going to emergency room with the EpiPens. And it was all because wasps and bees were getting more aggressive because the heat was so high and there was no available water source. And all of that just came out of, no one in our drought agency that's been doing drought for like 10, 15 years had never heard of an increase in the use of anaphylactic control measures because of a drought. But that happened in West Virginia.
So, meteorologists, did y'all figure that out or did EPIs figure that out?
It's a little bit like syndromic surveillance. We're looking at we looked at an area that was just going crisp, going into drought. And all of a sudden we started hearing from our public health partners, from the CDC, local public health, local hospitals. People are coming in with bee stings and wasp stings and what is going on? And the answer was drought.
And how did you guys mitigate that?
I believe the health department started putting out advisories.
Don't go outside.
Right. As a matter of fact, let me
Thank you.
pop this down just a bit and go back here. So you'll find a little bit more detailed in the Mid-Atlantic States Drought Assessment that was completed in 2025. So at the end of last year, click on that link when you get it, go in there and there's literally a picture of a wasp there, and it'll tell you what the public health departments, I think it was, they went into media bulletins and advisories, stay away from the nests, be prepared with your antidote pen. Well, I'm trying to think of some of the other things that were very strange with that one. You might have to go online to find it because we couldn't squeeze everything into this report and keep it actionable and readable. And that's the key, is taking the data and the tools we have and making it actionable for healthcare providers. The drought and health messaging framework is also available online. Step by step, what's D1 mean? What's D2 mean? What are the characteristics? What are you seeing in your populations at D4 or D5? And when the health department has this little flip chart, they said, oh, okay, N95 mass count. Let's go ahead and do that right now. Get ready for the, folks coming in with bee stings. Put out a message on the website. So it gives some step-by-step offerings to healthcare providers to get ahead of it or get ready for it. Is drought going to persist, or is the 7-day forecast looking like we're going to get a, atmospheric river or drought buster, and we don't have to worry about spending our limited public health budget on drought prevention? We can shift to water quality issues. So that's kind of, it's literally, you bring all those disciplines together And you start, what are you seeing? What are you seeing? What's the problems in your areas? Here's what we have from the weather side of the house. If it's drought, then you have these tools to work with. So I do strongly recommend both the messaging framework. The engagement strategy is what I talked about before. It was kind of like establishing our baseline. How do we get everybody talking together? How do we get the research community working on the information and data and tools that the practitioners really need? So that was the engagement. Then the framework, and again, that was mostly NIDIS with University of Nebraska's Medical Center. We could do that here in the Cincinnati and Ohio area. Down at the bottom, we looked a little bit more into when you're thinking about changes in your frequency of drought, your frequency of wet periods, how's that going to change your vectors in the area? What are your mosquito populations looking like? What are those cascade impacts going to do to your long-range planning for your hospital budget, for your health department budget per se? And a little bit of this goes a little bit deeper into the weather side of things. What don't we know? And I'll just put it out there for you. One of the biggest things, I mean, weather forecasting isn't always 100% right. One of the biggest things we're looking at now is something called effective precipitation. Okay, you get an inch of rain, all right? How effective is it? If that rain falls on hard, dry ground, it's running off. It's not very effective. Yet we calculate things based on an inch of rain. So are our indices really reflecting? So there's something for the research community to work on with our geology folks who are looking at soils, who are looking at landslide potential, things like that. So there's a lot of work going on. And typically on the website there, oops, sorry, should have jumped. I guess I lost my last slide there, but typically on that website for NIDIS, you can go and see some of the latest work. I really want to pull that up because there was another one there. And I'm going to wrap up here really quick.
Are you saying runoff is bad or good?
One-off what?
When you were talking about effective rainfall, wouldn't a runoff be good because it's going into the soil?
If your soil is like this,
Yes.
it is not getting in there. It's not going down to 0 to 10.
Okay.
It's running off and causing a flood.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
like I said, I love our partners in the agriculture world because they really see what's going on in terms of soil conditions. The geologists out there can't do our work without them with regard to streams and rivers and how they're looking. And again, I'd love to hear more about your work and your research needs. See how we can. Thank you all so much. I did.
Great information, great side of our YouTube. Very well, again, we're mostly on this side of the University of Cincinnati, the medical campus. And then there's people on the west campus. I don't know whether.
Great.
That could be another thing for that.
Got it.
That's on the west campus for geology.
Oh, that's great.
Engineering. One of their strengths. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. But yeah, just stay on this, the landing page. A lot of our latest research and reports come up there. And you can usually make that connection between drought and your field through this toolbar up here: data, sectors, geographic location, research and learn has a lot, or just use the search. So
Do you think arsenic levels in